Good evening. Welcome back to Sleep Stories of Forgotten Jobs, a calm place where you can drift into the quiet routines of work that once filled the world, one small task at a time. We're traveling, softly, back to 16th century Ottoman Anatolia, to the town of Iznik, known in this period for ceramics and tiles that will travel far beyond the town's walls, destined for grand buildings and calm interiors in the imperial city. Tonight's story is gentle and steady, a slow, careful day in a workshop where color is ground into powder, water is measured by habit, and the hours pass with the soft patience of craft. Imagine a place where the day begins before the streets are fully awake, where the light is warm, the air smells faintly of clay and ash, and the tools are laid out with quiet care. Tonight, you will spend a day as an Iznik tile painter, not as a famous name, not as a court official, but as a working artisan inside a small, orderly workshop. A person who makes beauty in repeatable steps. A person who knows that the calmest part of history is often the part where someone simply does their work. And now we begin. The first sound is not a shout, not a bell, not a dramatic call that jars you awake. It's a soft sound, wood shifting slightly as someone lifts a latch. A door opening with care. The cold air touches your face with the particular dampness of a town built near water. Lake Iznik sits close enough that you can smell it even from here, a mineral freshness mixed with a faint organic scent of reeds and shoreline mud. The lake was called Ascanius by the ancient Greeks, Nicaea when the Romans held this land, but now it is simply the lake, and it shapes everything about this place. The dampness in the air, the mists that rise at dawn, the way metal rusts faster here than in drier towns, the way bread must be kept wrapped or it grows soft. Your breath makes small clouds that dissolve almost immediately into the pre-dawn darkness. The sky is still that deep blue-black of the hour before sunrise, though the eastern edge shows a thin line of pale gray. Stars are fading one by one as you watch, disappearing not dramatically but simply ceasing to be visible as the sky begins its slow brightening. The streets are not entirely empty. A water carrier passes, his large ceramic jars balanced on a wooden yoke across his shoulders, heading toward the communal well. His footsteps make a particular rhythm, heavy light, as he adjusts for the weight. You nod to him and he nods back, but neither of you speaks. It is too early for conversation. From somewhere nearby comes the sound of a door opening, then closing. The creak of wooden shutters being unlatched. A woman's voice, low and indistinct, speaking to someone inside a house. A child's cough, sharp and short. The ordinary sounds of a town waking, layer by layer, as people begin their days. The smell of wood smoke begins to drift through the air. Cooking fires being lit in courtyards and kitchens. The smoke has a particular scent this morning, oak wood, which burns clean and hot. Some households cannot afford oak and burn cheaper pine or whatever scraps they can gather, but oak smoke smells different, richer, more substantial. You notice these things without thinking about them, the way you notice the texture of the ground beneath your feet. The ground itself tells a story as you walk. Here, the path is smooth packed earth, polished by countless feet over countless years. There, a patch of cobblestones, perhaps Roman in origin, uncovered when someone dug a new foundation. Further on, a section that turns to mud whenever it rains, avoided by those who can take a longer route. You know every texture of these streets from years of walking them in darkness, and your feet find the best path automatically. A rooster crows from someone's courtyard, the sound cutting sharp through the quiet. Another answers from farther away, and then another, a cascade of roosters announcing the approach of dawn to anyone who might have somehow missed it. A dog barks twice and falls silent. Somewhere a goat bleats, probably being led to the commons for grazing. As you walk, you become aware of your own body more fully. The salver trousers move with your legs, the loose cotton whispering with each step. The fabric is cool against your skin where the morning air has touched it, warmer where it has been pressed against your body. Your tunic shifts slightly with each movement, the belt holding it in place at your waist. The weight of the cloth on your shoulders is so familiar you barely register it, except in this moment of paying attention. Your feet in their simple leather shoes feel every variation in the path. The smooth sections, the stones, the slight rise here, the gentle dip there. Your body adjusts to these changes without conscious thought, maintaining balance, maintaining rhythm, carrying you forward toward work. From ahead comes the first call to prayer. The muezzin's voice rises into the gray air, beginning the adhan for far, the dawn prayer. Allahu Akbar. God is greatest. The call is musical, the traditional phrases rising and falling in patterns that you have heard every morning for as long as you can remember. The sound carries well in the quiet air. You can hear it clearly even though the mosque is several streets away. You are not particularly devout. You pray when time allows, when the workshop routine permits, when the master gives the few minutes needed. But the call to prayer is comforting nonetheless. It marks the official beginning of the day. It connects this morning to every other morning, this day to every other day, this place to every other place where the call is being sounded at this same moment. Other workers appear on the streets now as you walk. A shepherd boy driving a small flock of goats, their bells making soft rhythmic clinks. An old woman sweeping the area in front of her house, the brush making whisking sounds against packed earth. A baker's apprentice carrying a stack of fresh loaves, the bread still steaming slightly in the cool air, the smell of it making your stomach tighten with hunger even though you ate before leaving home. You pass the baker's shop and the warmth from the oven reaches out to you like a physical thing. The oven has been burning since long before dawn, the interior now a glowing red heart that turns dough into bread. The heat feels good on your face after the cool of walking. You pause for just a moment, letting the warmth touch you, then continue on. The town of Iznik has been a center of ceramic production for several decades now, ever since potters here began making blue and white wares in imitation of Chinese porcelain. Over the years, the production evolved. The palette expanded beyond just blue. New techniques were developed, including the famous raised red that has made Iznik tiles prized across the empire. And now, in this year of 1565, during the reign of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, the workshops are busier than ever. There is peace right now which helps. The Peace of Amasya, signed 10 years ago in 1555, ended decades of conflict with the Safavid Empire to the east. That peace has held, mostly, and peace means trade routes stay open. It means pigments arrive reliably from Persia. It means merchants can travel without excessive danger. It means the imperial building projects in Istanbul continue without interruption, which means steady orders for tiles, which means steady work for painters like you. You think about this as you walk, not with the conscious awareness of someone analyzing politics, but with the quiet gratitude of someone who remembers harder times. There were years when work was uncertain, when orders dried up, when workshops closed. Those years taught you not to take current stability for granted. You reach the workshop district as the sky lightens from gray to a pale gold. Here, the buildings change character. Thicker walls to hold the heat of kilns. Fewer windows to keep out dust. Wider doors to move large pieces. Everything is built for function, not beauty, though there is beauty in function if you know how to see it. Your workshop sits among others, each specializing in a different stage of ceramic production. The clay preparation happens in one building. The forming of bodies in another. The glazing in another. The firing in another. And your building, where blank surfaces become pattern, where white tiles receive the colors and designs that will make them valuable enough to travel to the capital and be set into walls of mosques and palaces. You reach the door and lift the iron latch. It is cool and slightly rough under your fingers, the metal showing its age. You push the door open, hearing the familiar groan of hinges that have never been oiled because everyone is so used to the sound that silence would seem strange. Inside, the oil lamp casts its circle of warm amber light, pushing back the darkness but not defeating it entirely. The corners remain in shadow. But the light is enough to work by, and more light will come soon through the window once you open the shutters. You step inside and close the door behind you, shutting out the street sounds, the morning cold, the waking town. This is your work world now. This is where your hands know what to do. This is where blank tiles become something more. The air is cool, carrying the faint scent of damp earth. In the distance, you can sense water nearby, lakes and channels and the damp breath of the landscape. The town is quiet. You walk to the workshop the way you always do, by habit. Your steps know the path. The workshop sits modestly, thick walls, a low entrance, a space built for steady work rather than display. Inside, the light is dim at first. A lamp glows gently, and the flame makes warm shadows on the plaster. Someone has been here before you. A small kindness, someone lighting the lamp early so you don't have to work in darkness. You set down your bundle. You loosen your belt slightly. You stretch your hands, because your hands matter here, not in a grand romantic way. In the practical way of a craftsperson, fingers that must stay steady, palms that must learn the weight of tools, wrists that must rest when they can. The first task is always the same. You do not begin with painting. You begin with preparing the day. On a low shelf there are bowls, simple forms, many reused, each one holding something that looks ordinary until you understand it. A pale powder, a darker bluish powder, a green-gray, a rusty red that, in the wrong hands, would look like common earth. But here nothing is common. Not when it becomes color under glaze. Not when it becomes pattern on a wall that will outlive everyone in the room. You move through the workshop slowly, checking what must be checked. Tiles set out to dry. Tiles already dried and waiting. Boards stacked in neat piles. Brushes carefully placed, bristles protected. A small jar of water with a lid, kept clean. A stone slab used for grinding. A cloth for wiping. A second cloth for wiping the cloth. And a third cloth, because in a workshop like this, there is always a third cloth. Near the back, you can smell the kiln area, not the harsh smell of a roaring fire because it isn't firing right now, but the soft leftover scent of ash and heat that lingers for days, like warmth clinging to stone. Your workshop is not alone in Iznik. There are other hands in other rooms doing other parts of the work, forming bodies, preparing surfaces, moving pieces, stacking, firing. But your place is here, at the table, at the pattern, at the brush that lays down color with a steadiness that becomes a kind of quiet. You sit, you place your hands on the table. And you begin with the first calm action of the day, cleaning your workspace. The table must be free of grit. The tile must be free of dust. The brush must be clean. Because underglaze painting is unforgiving, not cruel, not dramatic, just honest. A speck of grit becomes a flaw. A drip becomes a blur. A careless thumbprint becomes a shadow locked beneath glaze. So you clean slowly and you do it the way you always do. In small, repeatable motions. Wipe. Pause. Wipe again. Check the surface with your fingertips. Wipe again. And when the table feels right, you turn to the tiles. Not every ceramic surface welcomes paint. Not every clay body offers the clean, bright ground that your patterns require. Part of what makes Iznik work feel so luminous is the pale surface, the way pigments sit on it and remain clear under glaze. Many Iznik tiles are made with a stone paste, fritware, body, a quartz-rich mixture designed to produce a light, durable surface that takes decoration beautifully. Museums and collections often describe these tiles as stone paste and note the polychrome decoration under a transparent glaze. You don't recite recipes like a scholar. You learn them the way craftspeople learn, by doing, by watching, by listening to the older hands in the workshop, by feeling the difference when a batch behaves well and when it doesn't. The tile in front of you has already been prepared, formed and smoothed by other steps in the workshop. Your job is to inspect. You lift it carefully. You tilt it toward the lamplight. You look for tiny cracks. You look for unevenness. You look for places where the surface might drink pigment differently. Then you run your fingers lightly over it, so lightly it's almost not a touch. Smooth. Cool. A little chalky. A surface that seems to hold its breath. You set it down on a cloth so it doesn't scrape. Beside it, you place your pattern paper. The pattern is not random. It is not improvised in the moment. It belongs to a language of forms that has traveled through workshops, through courts, through architects' plans. forms that may include scrolling leaves, stylized blossoms, tulips, carnations, or long, elegant curves. You are not inventing the empire. You are building it quietly, one tile at a time. And in the background of this calm work, the world continues. In Istanbul, grand projects rise. The Süleymaniye Mosque, commissioned by Sultan Süleyman and designed by the imperial architect Mimar Sinan, was founded in 1550 and inaugurated in 1557. A vast complex whose dates are recorded by inscription. A few years later, the Rustam Pasha Mosque, also designed by Sinan, was completed around 1563 and became famous for the richness of its Iznik tiles. These projects matter to you in a very practical way. They mean orders. They mean deadlines that arrive politely but firmly. They mean stacks of tiles that must match in color and line, so that a wall reads as one continuous garden of pattern, not a patchwork of mismatched hands. You do not stand inside those mosques while they are built. You do not speak to the Sultan. But your work will travel. It will be packed in straw. It will bump along roads. It will pass through hands you will never meet. And one day, a tile you painted will be set into place, and someone in the imperial city will look at the wall and feel, without knowing your name, that the world can be arranged into beauty. You place the tile back on the table. You take a thin piece of charcoal or a fine marking tool, and you begin the next step, transferring the pattern. You begin with alignment. Everything begins with alignment. You position the tile so its edges are square with the table. You position the pattern so it sits evenly. You check the corners. Then you check them again. In a workshop like this, nothing is rushed. Not because you have all the time in the world, but because rushing creates mistakes that cost more time than patience ever did. You make the first marks lightly. A guideline. A gentle line that will vanish beneath later work. You pause. You compare the line to the pattern. You adjust the angle by the width of a fingernail. Then you draw another line. Slowly, carefully. The lamp flame shifts slightly, and the light trembles on the wall. Somewhere outside, a rooster calls. Somewhere else, a door opens. Life begins without demanding your attention. Your focus stays on the tile. As you draw, your mind moves in a soft rhythm, half present to the work, half drifting. And in that drift, you remember small things, the workshop sounds, the soft scrape of charcoal, the faint clink of a bowl being set down, the brush handles tapping lightly as you rearrange them. You remember the smell of yesterday's firing. You remember the taste of bread and olives from the evening before. You remember your child falling asleep with their head against your arm. No drama, no sharp pain, just the ordinary warmth of being part of a household and a craft. You add curves now, gentle arcs that will become stems. You add leaf shapes, stylized, repeated, recognizable. You place blossoms, balanced, not crowded. You add the rhythm of a border. And as you do, you think, softly, about how these motifs travel. How courts influence workshops. How workshops influence what people see as beauty. How a pattern can become a kind of quiet order in a world that is not always orderly. Because outside the workshop, the empire is large and it is busy. There are campaigns and treaties and boundaries shifting in distant regions. Not as a story to excite you, only as the distant weather of history. In the East, the Ottoman-Safavid conflict of the mid-1500s led to the Peace of Amasya, 1555, a formal agreement that eased pressure for a time. In port cities and crowded neighborhoods, diseases come and go in cycles that people learn to live around, quietly, practically, without making a spectacle of fear. Recurring plague in the Ottoman world is well documented as part of the broader early modern Mediterranean experience. And yet, inside your workshop, the day remains simple. Because your task is not to solve history. Your task is to paint a tile correctly. You finish the last guideline. You lift the pattern sheet. You check the tile. The lines are clean. The composition is balanced. The shapes are ready. The pattern you have just transferred to these 5 tiles is not random. Every curve, every flower, every leaf carries meaning that reaches beyond mere decoration. You do not think about this meaning constantly as you work, but it is there, embedded in the design, waiting to be read by those who know the language. The tulip, which dominates the central medallion, is perhaps the most important flower in Ottoman visual culture. The word itself, Layl in Turkish, contains the same letters as Allah when written in Arabic script, though in a different order. This coincidence has given the tulip special significance. To paint a tulip is not simply to paint a flower. It is to invoke paradise, to suggest the gardens that await the faithful, to create a visual echo of divine beauty. The shape of the tulip in Ottoman art is stylized, abstracted from the actual flower into a form that emphasizes its essential character. The petals curve in particular ways. The proportions follow rules that were established by court designers and have been refined over decades. A tulip that is painted with incorrect proportions looks wrong to anyone familiar with Ottoman aesthetics. Not wrong in a way that is easy to explain, but wrong in the way that a false note in music is wrong. The eye knows even if the mind cannot articulate why. The carnations that appear in the scrolling foliage carry their own significance. They represent earthly beauty, the pleasures of the physical world, but in a spiritualized form. The carnation in an Ottoman design is not about sexual desire but about the proper appreciation of God's creation. The flower exists to be beautiful. Humans exist partly to recognize and honor that beauty. The carnation on a tile reminds viewers of this relationship. The scrolling foliage that connects the flowers is called Rumi in the workshop vocabulary, a term that acknowledges its origins in Byzantine decoration, which Ottomans called Roman work. These curving stems and leaves create rhythm across the tile surface. They lead the eye from one flower to another. They fill space without crowding it. They create a sense of organic growth, as if the pattern is alive and spreading across the tile. But this organic appearance is deceptive. Every curve is calculated. Every leaf placement follows rules. The pattern may suggest natural growth, but it is actually highly controlled, designed to repeat perfectly, to create continuous flow when tiles are placed side by side. Natural flowers grow chaotically. Patterned flowers grow with mathematical precision. The border pattern, with its geometric interlocking shapes, provides a frame that contains the floral exuberance of the central design. Geometry in Islamic art represents divine order, the underlying mathematical reality that structures creation. Where flowers represent the visible beauty of the world, geometry represents the invisible laws that govern it. A well-designed tile balances both, the organic appeal of flowers and the rigorous order of geometry. These design principles did not originate in Iznik. They came from the imperial court in Istanbul, where designers working for the Sultan developed a visual language that synthesized influences from many sources. Persian miniature painting contributed flowing scrollwork and sophisticated floral rendering. Chinese porcelain provided blue and white palette and certain flower forms. Traditional Islamic geometric patterns provided the mathematical rigor. Byzantine mosaics, visible in converted churches, offered lessons in how pattern fills architectural space. The court designers took all of these influences and created something distinctly Ottoman, something that looked like none of its sources while honoring all of them. And this Ottoman aesthetic was then distributed through pattern books, through objects sent to workshops, through the mobility of trained craftsmen, until even a workshop in Iznik could reproduce court-quality designs. But you are not a court designer. You did not invent this pattern. Your role is reproduction, not innovation. You are a translator, taking the design language created by masters in Istanbul and rendering it correctly, consistently, beautifully on tile after tile. This might seem like less prestigious work than innovation, but it requires its own kind of mastery. A pattern must be reproduced exactly. The proportions must match. The spacing must be consistent. When 5 tiles are placed side by side, the pattern must flow without breaks or discontinuities. If your tulip is slightly larger than it should be, the rhythm breaks. If your scrollwork curves more tightly than the pattern specifies, the connection to the next tile will be wrong. This is why workshops maintain pattern books and reference tiles. The master designer at the court might create a pattern once, but that single creation must be reproduced thousands of times by hundreds of painters and dozens of workshops. Without strict adherence to the original proportions and forms, the pattern would drift, mutate, lose its coherence. Quality control is not about crushing creativity. It is about maintaining the integrity of a visual language across space and time. You have internalized this language through years of practice. Your hand knows the correct curve of a tulip petal without needing to measure. Your eye knows the correct spacing between flowers without needing to count. This knowledge lives in your muscles and nerves below the level of conscious thought. You could not easily explain in words why this spacing is correct and that spacing is wrong, but your hand knows, and that is enough. Sometimes you wonder what it would be like to design rather than reproduce. To stand at a blank page and imagine a new pattern, to make choices about which flowers to use and how to arrange them, to create the original that others would then copy. But this wondering is brief and mild. You are not dissatisfied with your role. There is dignity in reproduction done well. There is satisfaction in taking a design and rendering it so perfectly that it could be placed beside the original and be indistinguishable. And there is beauty in being part of a larger system. The pattern you paint today connects to patterns painted yesterday and patterns that will be painted tomorrow. Your 5 tiles will join hundreds of others to create a wall. That wall will join other walls to create a room. That room will join other rooms to create a building that serves some purpose in the empire's capital city. You are a small part of a large whole, and there is peace in that smallness. The pattern is ready now. The charcoal guidelines are clear. The tiles wait for color. You select your finest brush, the one with the mountain squirrel hair that comes to a perfect point. You load it with black outline pigment. And you begin the work that will transform these markings into permanent lines. Now comes the part that feels to you like the heart of the work: color, pigment, the careful, repeatable magic of turning powder into a living line. You set the pattern tile aside for a moment. Now comes the part that feels like a small miracle even after years. Powder becomes color, and color becomes a stable line that will survive heat and time. You pull a low tray closer. On it are small bowls, some glazed, some worn, all familiar. In one bowl, a blue that is almost nothing at first, a fine dust, dull in the morning lamp. In another, a greenish tint that looks like crushed stone. In another, a dark powder for outlines. In workshops like this, the palette did not appear all at once. Iznik ceramics began in a blue and white phase using cobalt, then expanded as additional pigments were developed and adopted across the 16th century. Turquoise from copper compounds, purple from manganese compounds, and later the distinctive raised red, often described as bole or Armenian bole, introduced around the mid-16th century. But you are not thinking in museum timelines right now. You are thinking in today's batch, today's tile, today's line. You take the bowl of blue. Cobalt-based blue is historically central to the Iznik palette, widely described as derived from cobalt. You touch the powder with the tip of a clean tool and feel how fine it is. Then you slide the powder to the stone slab. A grinding stone sits nearby, smooth with use. You add a few drops of water. Not a pour. A few drops. Because too much water wastes time. Too little water makes the pigment drag. You grind in slow circles. A steady rhythm. Press, circle, lift, and repeat. The sound is soft, stone on stone, like a quiet whisper. You grind until the mixture becomes a paste. Then you thin it slightly. A little more water. A slow stir. You watch how it moves. This is one of your quiet skills. You can tell by the way the pigment trails behind the stick whether it will behave on the tile. Too thick and it will clump. Too thin and it will run. So you aim for the middle, the calm consistency that sits obediently in a brush. You move to turquoise. By the mid-16th century, descriptions of Iznik techniques commonly note turquoise as copper oxide based. You treat it the same way. Powder to slab. A few drops of water. Slow grinding. slow thinning. Then the purple. Manganese-based purples are also frequently noted in summaries of the Iznik palette development. You prepare it carefully. Purple can look muddy if mishandled, so you keep it clean. Clean slab, clean grinder, clean water, clean bowl. You keep your day tidy because a tidy day reduces mistakes. Now the outline color. Some sources describe black in Iznik work as chrome-based. Scientific analyses also show black contours can involve multiple elements, depending on the piece and period. You do not argue with chemistry. You simply prepare the outline mixture your workshop uses, dark enough to hold a line, stable enough to survive firing. And now the most difficult color. The one that makes people whisper, Iznik, with a kind of reverence. The raised red, often described as bole, sealing wax red, or Armenian bole, a thick iron-rich pigment that sits slightly proud of the surface, introduced around the mid-16th century and treated as a major technical innovation. You do not use it casually. You do not rush it. Red is stubborn. Red wants to misbehave. So you make it thick, thicker than your blues so it will hold its place. You grind it longer. You test it on a scrap surface. You watch it dry. You judge its body. Because if the red fails, the whole tile feels wrong. And if the tile feels wrong, the wall feels wrong. So you give the red the respect of extra patience. By the time your pigments are prepared, the workshop has changed. More light at the doorway. More footsteps outside. A faint murmur of other workers arriving. But your table is now a calm station of order. Bowl, bowl, bowl. Brushes lined up. Water covered. Cloths folded. Tile waiting. The cobalt you are grinding has traveled further than you will ever travel in your lifetime. It began deep underground in mountains near Kashan in Persia, where miners identified veins of cobalt-bearing rock by the faint blue-gray discoloration it creates in surrounding stone. The mining itself is dangerous work, tunneling into mountains, working by lamplight, breathing dust that damages lungs over years. Men die in those mines. Cave-ins, bad air, accidents with tools. But the work continues because cobalt has value. The extracted rock is not immediately useful. It must be roasted in special furnaces to drive off arsenic and sulfur compounds that contaminate the cobalt oxide. This roasting produces toxic fumes that sicken the workers, but the process is necessary. After roasting, the material is crushed and washed repeatedly to separate the cobalt oxide from worthless stone. What remains is ground into the fine powder you now work with. That powder was packed into leather bags and loaded onto camels. The caravan traveled west, following routes that have existed for centuries. Through Kashan, through Isfahan, through Tabriz. At each city, merchants took their cut, adding their margin. The cobalt changed hands perhaps 6 or 7 times on its journey, each transaction adding cost. Eventually, the cobalt reached a merchant who specializes in supplying ceramic workshops. That merchant brought samples to Iznik, met with your workshop master and negotiated price. The negotiation probably involved tea and conversation and the careful dance of seeming disinterested while actually caring very much about the final number. Your master is good at these negotiations. He knows the difference between good cobalt and bad cobalt. He knows the current market price. He knows how much the workshop can afford. The price was steep. A full container of cobalt, enough to paint perhaps 50 tiles, costs as much as a skilled craftsman earns in 3 weeks of work, which means the small amount of powder you transferred to your grinding slab represents perhaps a day's wages. You handle it accordingly with respect and care, making sure not a single grain is wasted. The cobalt's cost is justified by its performance. Cheap blue pigments exist, but they behave poorly. They might turn greenish in the kiln or fade to gray, or develop an uneven mottled appearance. Good Persian cobalt is reliable. It produces a consistent, brilliant blue that survives the heat of firing without degrading. In a craft where consistency is everything, reliable pigment is worth its price. The turquoise pigment comes from copper oxide, and its story is different. Copper has been mined across the Mediterranean and Near East for thousands of years. The ores are relatively common and the extraction methods well established. Copper oxide can be produced from malachite, a bright green mineral, or from azurite, which is blue. The processing involves roasting the ore to drive off carbon dioxide, leaving behind copper oxide that can be ground into pigment. Because copper sources are more numerous and closer than cobalt sources, turquoise costs less, perhaps one-third the price of cobalt. This makes it an economical choice for accents and secondary elements. But turquoise has its own challenges. It tends to be grainier than cobalt, requiring longer grinding. The color can vary depending on the source and the firing conditions. A batch that looks perfect before glazing might emerge from the kiln slightly greener or slightly bluer than expected. Experience teaches you to adjust the preparation to compensate for these variations. The green pigment your workshop uses is chrome-based, derived from chromium oxide. This is a relatively recent addition to the Iznik palette, developed within the last few decades as potters experimented with new color possibilities. Chromium oxide produces a stable, pleasant green that sits between blue and yellow without being muddy, but it requires careful grinding. Undergrind it and the color looks grainy. Overgrind it and it can take on a grayish cast. You have learned through hundreds of batches exactly how long to grind this particular green to achieve the clean, bright tone that makes patterns look crisp rather than dull. The purple comes from manganese dioxide, a mineral that has been used as a pigment since ancient times. Cave paintings thousands of years old used manganese-based blacks and purples. The manganese your workshop uses probably comes from deposits in Anatolia itself, though you are not certain of the exact source. It is ground from chunks of the mineral into powder, which is then refined by the supplier before reaching the workshop. Manganese is tricky. Too much and it turns nearly black. Too little and it looks washed out. The proportion must be exact. And manganese has another quirk. It has a tendency to spread slightly during firing if the mixture is too thin. This spreading can blur outlines and muddy boundaries between colors. So you keep manganese-based purple slightly thicker than your other pigments, thick enough to stay put but thin enough to flow from a brush. The black outline pigment is perhaps the most complex. It might contain chrome oxide for depth, manganese for darkness, and iron oxide for stability. The exact recipe is a workshop secret, developed over years of experimentation and carefully guarded. Other workshops have their own black recipes. The difference might seem subtle, but to a trained eye, each workshop's black has a character. Yours is deep and slightly warm, never looking harsh or cold. And then there is the red. The famous Iznik red that makes these tiles distinctive and valuable. This pigment is iron-based, specifically a refined iron oxide sometimes called Armenian bole because much of the best material comes from deposits in Armenia. The red earth from certain Armenian hills produces an iron oxide of particular purity and color, but the iron oxide alone is not enough. The secret of the raised red is in how it is prepared and applied. The pigment must be mixed much thicker than the other colors with less water, creating a paste that has actual body and weight. When applied, this thick paste sits proud of the tile surface, creating a slight relief. During firing, the iron oxide undergoes chemical changes, and the thickness allows it to maintain its raised profile while developing a brilliant red color. This red is expensive not just because of the iron oxide itself, but because of the skill required to prepare and apply it correctly. Many tiles fail because the red was prepared wrong. Too thin and it flows and loses its raised character. Too thick and it can crack or pull away from the tile body. The consistency must be perfect, and perfect is a narrow window that takes years to learn to hit consistently. Last month, a batch of red failed. The workshop master mixed it himself, which he rarely does, and something went wrong. Perhaps the pigment was from a bad batch. Perhaps the humidity was wrong that day. Perhaps the grinding was insufficient. Whatever the cause, the red came out of the kiln looking wrong. Not bright and brilliant, but dull and brownish. 40 tiles ruined. Days of work lost. Expensive materials wasted. The master called everyone together to examine the failed tiles. Not to assign blame but to learn. You all looked at the red carefully, discussed what might have gone wrong, proposed theories. Was it the firing temperature? The glaze mixture? The pigment preparation? In the end, no one was certain. Ceramic chemistry is complex, and even experienced craftsmen cannot always predict or explain what happens in the fire. Since that failure, the master has been even more careful with red preparation. He mixes each batch himself now, measuring the water drops with paranoid precision, grinding longer than before, testing on multiple shards before declaring a batch ready for use. The cost of that failure in both materials and time has made everyone more cautious. You think about this as you finish grinding your purple pigment. The cost of materials is always present in your mind, a gentle pressure to be careful, to waste nothing, to do the work right the first time because doing it wrong is expensive. The workshop operates on narrow margins. The price paid for commissions must cover the cost of materials, the cost of labor, the cost of firewood for kilns, and still leave enough profit to keep the workshop viable. Waste cuts into those already thin margins. This is why workshops have such strict hierarchies and training systems. The master controls the expensive pigments. The journeymen are trusted to prepare them under supervision. The apprentices do not touch them at all, at least not in the early years. An apprentice might spend 2 years just grinding basic pigments for practice, using cheap materials, learning the feel and technique before being allowed to work with cobalt or red. You were an apprentice once. You remember those years of grinding practice pigments, making countless test strokes on shards, watching your lines improve slowly from shaky to confident. You remember the first time the master allowed you to prepare real cobalt, how nervous you were, how carefully you measured each drop of water. You remember the satisfaction when he examined your prepared batch and nodded approval. Now you are the skilled painter, the one who can be trusted with expensive materials, the one whose tiles consistently survive firing and pass inspection. This trust was earned through years of careful work. It is maintained through continued careful work. One batch of careless mistakes would damage that trust. You transfer the finished purple pigment to its bowl and set it with the others. 5 bowls now. Each one representing not just color but value. Not just pigment but the labor of miners and processors and merchants and your own grinding work. Each bowl contains possibility, the potential to transform blank tiles into beautiful pattern. You rinse your grinding stone and slab one final time, wiping them carefully. The morning's pigment preparation is complete. The colors are ready. Now comes the painting, the part where all this preparation transforms into actual tiles. You choose a brush, not a dramatic tool. A modest handle, bristles fine enough to place a controlled line. You dip into the outline color first. Outlines give the day structure. Outlines define where everything will go and where it will not go. You bring the brush to the tile. You breathe out, and you draw the first line. A curve, gentle, even. You follow the charcoal guide you made earlier. Line by line, the pattern becomes more real. There is a particular kind of calm in tracing. You are not inventing a shape out of nothing. You are following a shape that already exists, that already belongs, so your mind can relax into obedience. Curve, pause, curve. A leaf edge, a stem, a blossom outline, a border line. Your brush lifts and returns with the same patient rhythm. If your hand trembles slightly, you wait. If the bristle catches a tiny grain of dust, you stop and clean it. You keep the surface clean because you understand what happens next. Once glaze goes over this painting, everything becomes permanent. So this stage, this quiet stage, is where you take care. You finish the outline of one motif, then you move to the next, one tulip-like form, then another. One blossom, then the leaves around it. You don't have to name the motif. You don't have to lecture about it. You only have to paint it cleanly. Now you rinse the brush. Rinse gently. Blot on cloth. Rinse again. Blot again. You treat your brush like a living thing. Not because it is living, because it is sensitive. And sensitivity is useful. You reach for blue, cobalt blue, the color that began the tradition. You load the brush. You test the stroke on a small practice shard. Then you fill a section of the design. Not flooding the area, not scrubbing it. A smooth application. The pigment sits in a soft matte layer, waiting for glaze. You keep your edges clean. You let the blue stop exactly where it should stop. Then you move to turquoise, then to green tones, then a touch of purple where the design calls for it. The palette expansion, turquoise, greens, purples, and later the famous raised red, marks the classic development of 16th century Iznik polychrome work. But again, you are not thinking in centuries. You are thinking in centimeters. A petal, a leaf, a border. You paint one leaf, then another, then another. The work is slow, and in the slowness your mind begins to drift. Because the task is repetitive enough that your attention can soften. This is where you notice small workshop sounds. A bowl set down, a cloth shaken out, the faint scrape of a chair, a quiet cough. No shouting, no chaos, just people working. When you reach for the red, you pause. Red changes the mood of a tile. Even in a calm pattern, red stands forward. So you use it sparingly and carefully. You load the brush with thicker pigment. And you place red like you would place something precious, deliberately. A petal center, a small accent, a border detail. You do not smear. You do not hurry. You place it and you let it sit. The bowl red is described as a thick iron oxide pigment applied under the glaze, often with a raised quality that makes it distinctive. When you finish a section, you stop. You look. You correct small things. A line that needs a steadier curve. A corner that needs a slightly sharper edge. A fill area that needs a second pass. Then you move on. Tile painting is not one long act. It is many small acts. And your day is built from them. Line, fill, rinse, blot. Line, fill, rinse, blot. Each repetition is calm. Each repetition is order. And order in a loud world is a kind of quiet relief. When you finish painting a tile, you do not celebrate. You do not hold it up like a trophy. You set it aside carefully. Because the tile is not finished until it survives the kiln. The kiln is the honest judge. Not cruel, just honest. A kiln can blur lines if heat is wrong. It can change color if a batch behaves differently. It can crack a tile if it was not dried properly. So you respect the kiln. And you plan. In the back area, the kiln space is quiet today. No roaring fire right now. But there are traces everywhere. Ash in a corner. A smell in the brick. A faint memory of heat. You look at the schedule. Not written on a fancy slate. More like spoken memory and routine. Which tiles are ready to be fired? Which tiles still need drying? Which tiles must wait because the kiln load must be full enough to justify the fuel? In descriptions of Iznik firing practices, saggers, lidded containers, are discussed as a way to protect pieces in the kiln, and firing temperatures around 900 degrees Celsius are mentioned in technical summaries. You don't say 900 in your head. You simply know what hot enough looks like by what the kiln master says, and by what past batches taught everyone. Your part is to deliver painted tiles ready to be stacked, so you make sure they are dry enough. Not dry to the touch, dry through. Because dampness trapped inside becomes trouble. You place finished tiles on a shelf where air circulates. You keep dust away. You keep curious hands away. You keep them safe. Then you wait. Waiting is part of craftsmanship. People forget this. They think craft is only action. But in a kiln-based craft, time is half the work. Drying time, heating time, cooling time. And you cannot rush cooling. A rushed cooling can ruin a piece. So the workshop learns patience whether it wants to or not. Outside the workshop, the empire is busy. There are borders to manage, campaigns and negotiations, trade routes, caravans, supplies moving. But for a moment, your day is simple. You have completed your painted tiles. Now they must become ceramic truth in fire. and fire does not care about hurry. In the broader mid-16th century context, one stabilizing marker on the eastern frontier was the Peace of Amasya, signed in 1555 between the Ottomans and Safavids, described as an important treaty that held for roughly 2 decades. That kind of stability matters even to a tile painter. Quietly, because stability means materials arrive more reliably and commissions continue. But you do not debate diplomacy at your table. You simply feel in the background whether the world is calm enough for work to keep flowing. And you return to the part you can control, your next tile. By midday, the workshop has fully awakened. The light at the doorway is stronger. The floor is warmer underfoot. People speak a little more now, still not loud, still not dramatic, but the energy is different than the early morning hush. This is when you eat something small, not a feast, a worker's meal. Simple foods that travel and keep: bread, dairy, olives, vegetables when available. Ottoman diet descriptions, especially for Istanbul and the wider empire, regularly emphasize grains, meat, dairy, vegetables, fruits, and spices as common categories, with variation by place and class. You sit near the wall where shade keeps the air cooler. You unwrap what you brought. Bread. A small piece of cheese or yogurt when available, something that sits quietly in the stomach, and perhaps olives or a bit of vegetable. Nothing fancy, just fuel. You eat slowly because the afternoon still holds hours of careful work. While you eat, your mind moves, quietly, to your home, to your family. You picture the small tasks that continue without you. Someone sweeping, someone preparing water, someone minding a child, someone mending cloth. The life of a craftsperson is not only the workshop, it is the bridge between workshop and household, day after day. You think about money, but not dramatically, only practically. How the workshop pays, how payments arrive, sometimes as coin, sometimes as goods, sometimes as arrangements that make sense only inside the local economy. You are not a courtier, you are not a governor, you are a person who needs predictable stability. The bread you are eating cost 2 aki at the baker's shop yesterday. Your wife bought it in the late afternoon when the price dropped slightly, the baker preferring to sell day-old bread cheaply rather than have it go stale. 2 aki for a loaf large enough to feed your household for a day. This is the currency of your daily life, these small silver coins that move from hand to hand, that accumulate slowly through work and disappear quickly through necessity. Your wage as a skilled tile painter varies depending on how many tiles you complete and how complex the patterns are. On a good day, painting 5 tiles of moderate complexity, you might earn 15 to 20 aki. A very good day with 6 tiles completed might reach 25 aki. A difficult day, when a pattern is unfamiliar or when mistakes force you to start over, might yield only 10 or 12 aki. But averaged over a week, you earn roughly 100 aki, sometimes slightly more, rarely much less. This 100 aki per week must cover everything. The workshop master holds back nothing for taxes or future payments. What you earn, you take home in a small leather pouch that makes a satisfying weight in your hand. And then begins the careful division of resources. Rent for your house takes 5 aki per week. The house belongs to a merchant who owns several properties in your quarter. Once a week, on Friday, his agent comes around to collect. 5 aki for a single room with a small courtyard, a hearth for cooking, a sleeping area separated by a curtain. It is not spacious, but it is solid. The roof does not leak. The walls keep out winter cold reasonably well. 5 aki is fair, perhaps even slightly generous for a working family's dwelling. Food takes the largest portion of your earnings, perhaps 50 aki per week to feed 4 people. This includes bread, which is the foundation of every meal. A family of 4 needs roughly 1 large loaf per day, perhaps slightly more. At 2 aki per loaf, that is 14 aki per week just for bread. The baker knows your face and sometimes gives you a slightly larger loaf without adjusting the price, a small kindness that makes a real difference over time. Beyond bread, there is bulgur, cracked wheat that can be cooked into a filling pilaf. You buy bulgur in bulk, a large sack that lasts perhaps 2 weeks, costing maybe 8 aki. The bulgur is cooked with water, a little butter if there is butter to spare, some salt, perhaps an onion if onions are affordable that week. The result is simple but sustaining, a dish that fills the stomach and provides steady energy for work. Your wife makes ayran, the yogurt drink, by mixing yogurt with water and a pinch of salt. The yogurt comes from a neighbor who keeps goats, traded for a small amount of coin or sometimes for other goods. A jar of yogurt might cost 1 aki and can be stretched into several days' worth of ayran. The drink is cooling, especially in summer, and helps with digestion. You drink it with the midday meal, feeling it coat your throat, settle your stomach. Vegetables vary by season and price. In late summer, eggplant is cheap and plentiful, maybe 1 aki for 3 good-sized eggplants. Your wife roasts them over the fire until the skin blackens and the flesh becomes soft, then removes the skin and mixes the flesh with oil and salt. The result is rich and satisfying, almost like eating meat. But in winter, vegetables are expensive and scarce, and you rely more heavily on dried beans and lentils, which keep well and cost less. Olives are a regular part of the diet, bought in bulk from a merchant who brings them from groves near the coast. A large jar of olives, enough for several weeks, might cost 6 or 7 aki. They are salty and rich, providing flavor to otherwise plain meals. You eat them with bread, with bulgur, with anything that needs a sharp contrasting taste. Cheese from sheep's milk costs roughly 1 aki for a piece the size of your fist. It is crumbly and salty, the kind of cheese that keeps for days without spoiling. You eat it sparingly, a small piece at a time, making it last. Sometimes, if money is tight, you skip the cheese for a week and make do with what you have. Meat is rare. Perhaps once every 2 weeks, your wife buys a small amount of lamb or mutton from the butcher. Maybe 3 or 4 aki for enough meat to flavor a stew. The meat is cut into small pieces and cooked slowly with onions and whatever vegetables are available, creating a broth that can be eaten with bread. The meat itself might be gone in 1 meal, but the flavored broth stretches for 2 or 3 days, making the entire family feel they have eaten richly. Oil, whether olive oil or the cheaper alternatives, costs dearly. A small flask of good olive oil might be 2 aki, and it must last a week or more. You use it sparingly, a few drops to flavor food, a little more if something is being fried. When the oil is gone, your wife scrapes the bottom of the flask with a piece of bread, unwilling to waste even the film that clings to the ceramic. Salt is a small but necessary expense. Perhaps 1 aki per month for enough salt to last. Salt is used for everything: flavoring food, preserving vegetables, making ayran. Without salt, food is bland and difficult to digest. You take salt for granted until it runs out, and then you realize how much you depend on it. Firewood for cooking costs perhaps 5 aki per week in winter, slightly less in summer when you need less heating. Your wife buys it from a man who brings bundles of wood from the forest, chopped and tied. Good oak for special occasions. Cheaper pine for daily use. Sometimes, when money is especially tight, she sends your son to gather fallen branches from the commons, free wood that burns quickly but costs nothing. So far, that is approximately 80 aki per week accounted for. 5 for rent, 50 for food, 5 for firewood, and small amounts for oil, salt, and other necessities. That leaves perhaps 20 aki per week for everything else. Clothes, repairs, medicine if someone falls ill, contributions to the mosque for Friday prayers, small amounts saved for emergencies. Clothes are a significant occasional expense. Your salver and tunic are worn and will need replacing eventually. A new set of working clothes might cost 20 aki, a full week's wages. Your wife can mend and patch, extending the life of garments, but eventually the fabric becomes so worn that patching is impossible. Then there is no choice but to buy new cloth and have it sewn, or buy ready-made clothes if available. Your children need clothes too, and they are growing. What fits this year will be too small next year. Fortunately, children's clothes can sometimes be traded within the neighborhood. Your son's outgrown tunic might go to a neighbor's younger son, and in exchange you receive a slightly larger one from someone else. These informal networks of exchange reduce the burden of constant replacement. Medicine, when needed, is expensive. A visit to the hakim, the physician, costs several aki even for a simple consultation. Medicine ingredients cost more. Last year, when your daughter had a persistent fever, you spent nearly 40 aki on visits and medicine over the course of a week. It was worth it, she recovered, but it meant eating very simply for a month to rebuild your small savings. The workshop operates on a similar principle of careful economics. When a commission comes in, the price is negotiated between the patron and the workshop master. For example, a mosque might order 500 tiles for a particular wall. The negotiation settles on a total price, perhaps 20,000 aki for the complete order. This seems like an enormous sum, and it is, but it must cover everything. From that 20,000 aki, the master must pay for materials. The tile bodies themselves cost money to produce, perhaps 2 aki per tile, or 1,000 aki for 500 tiles. The pigments are expensive, especially the cobalt and red. For a large order, pigment costs might reach 2,000 aki. The glaze ingredients cost another 1,000 or more. Firewood for multiple kiln firings costs several hundred aki. The workshop rent, the maintenance of equipment, the cost of broken or failed tiles, all of this comes out of the commission payment. Then there is labor. The workshop employs perhaps 8 to 10 workers at various skill levels. The master painter takes the largest share, perhaps 30% of what remains after materials. The skilled painters like you take perhaps 20% to share among 3 or 4 workers. The journeymen take 15% to share. The apprentices take 5% to share among several young workers. What remains is the workshop's profit, the amount that keeps the business viable. This means that from the 20,000 aki commission, perhaps 3,000 aki is divided among the painters as wages. If 500 tiles are painted over the course of 2 months, and you personally paint 100 of those tiles, your share might be 600 aki total, or about 75 aki per week during that period. This is better than your usual wage, which is why everyone works hard when a large commission comes in. But commissions are not constant. There might be weeks with little work, when you earn only 8 or 10 aki per day because orders are slow. Then there are weeks of intense work, when everyone labors from dawn until late into the night to meet a deadline. The irregular nature of the work means you must save during good weeks to survive the slow weeks. The workshop master maintains a fund for emergencies. If a worker is injured and cannot work, the fund pays a small amount to help the family survive until recovery. If a kiln fails catastrophically, destroying a month's worth of work, the fund helps absorb the loss so the workshop does not close. Everyone contributes a small percentage of their wages to this fund, perhaps 5%. You resent the deduction when times are good, but you appreciate its existence when times are not. Your household has a small amount saved, perhaps 200 aki hidden in a cloth bag inside your storage chest. This is your emergency fund, your buffer against disaster. If you fall ill and cannot work for a week, this money buys food and time. If the roof leaks and requires repair, this money pays the workers. If a family emergency requires travel, this money makes it possible. The savings accumulate slowly, an aki or 2 per week when times are good, and disappear suddenly when crisis arrives. You are not wealthy, but you are not desperate. You are secure in the way that skilled craftsmen can be secure in a functioning economy. You have work that is valued. You have skills that are needed. You have a household that is fed and sheltered. You have small savings against uncertainty. This is success, not luxury, but success nonetheless. Many people have less. Some have more. You occupy the middle space, the territory of the skilled artisan who earns enough to live decently without ever becoming rich. This is the economic reality that frames your day. The tiles you paint have value because people with wealth want beautiful walls. That value flows through negotiations and commissions down to your wage. Your wage transforms into bread and oil and rent and small savings. The system works as long as everyone plays their role. The patron must want tiles. The workshop must produce them. You must paint them skillfully. The economy must remain stable enough that all these exchanges continue. You finish your midday meal, wrap the remaining bread back in its cloth, and drink the last of your water. The economics recede from your conscious mind, but they do not disappear. They shape what you do, how carefully you work, why you do not waste pigment, why you arrive early and leave late. Money is not everything, but it is the foundation under everything else. Without it, even the most beautiful patterns become impossible. You drink water, and you return to the table. Now, a quiet shadow crosses the day, softly, without detail. A rumor of illness in a distant place. A mention that someone in a market has been coughing more than usual. In early modern Ottoman history, plague outbreaks recur across long periods. Historians discuss recurring plague as a reality the empire repeatedly faced, shaped by trade and connectivity. In a workshop, people respond in practical ways. They don't perform panic. They adjust. They avoid unnecessary crowds. They keep work steady, because work is how you eat. Work is how you keep the household stable. Work is how you remain part of a world that continues. So you let the rumor pass like weather. Not ignored, just not fed. You return to the brush, because the brush is here. The tile is here. And what you can control is small and real. In the afternoon, you will paint again. You will rinse again. You will correct small curves again. You will set tiles aside again. And you will keep building order. After midday, the workshop settles into its most reliable shape. This is the stretch of the day where you don't need inspiration. You need steadiness. The lamp is no longer the main light now. Daylight reaches deeper into the room. Not enough to make it bright, just enough to soften the shadows and make the colors easier to judge. You return to the table. You place the next tile in front of you. You check the surface again, always the surface first. A soft brush clears dust. A cloth wipes the cloth. The tile sits on a folded fabric so it doesn't scrape on the table. And you begin the same loop again. Outline, then fill, rinse, blot, repeat. The outline brush goes down first. A calm curve, a leaf edge, a blossom ring, a border line. You follow the guide marks you made earlier, and the guide marks do what they were meant to do. They keep your day from becoming complicated. You finish the outline of one small cluster of motifs. You rinse. You blot. You look at the next cluster. You outline again. By now, your hand knows what the day feels like. The first hour was careful and fresh. Midday was warm and practical. Now the afternoon is long. So you are kind to your hand. You loosen your grip. You keep your wrist soft. You pause before fatigue becomes a mistake. You don't try to push through. Pushing through is expensive later. So you work like a person who expects to do this again tomorrow. Now the blues, cobalt. That familiar deep blue that always looks slightly dull before glaze, like it's waiting to be awakened by fire. You load the brush with a controlled amount. You test the stroke on a small shard. Then you fill a petal, a leaf section, a border band. You keep the pigment within the outline. You keep your edges clean. Then you rinse, blot, and move to turquoise. Turquoise brightens the tile in a gentle way. Feels like water and sky, cool, steady. You place it in the pattern where it belongs. Not too much, not everywhere. Just enough to give the eye a place to rest. Then green. Then purple if today's pattern calls for it. You do not force a color. You do not argue with it. If a pigment behaves slightly differently in this batch, you adjust the water ratio. You thin slightly or keep it thicker so it lays down evenly. And then the red. The red is always a moment of quiet attention. You don't bring drama to it, only respect. You load the brush with thicker pigment. You touch the tile carefully. A small accent, a petal center, a bold detail that will lift slightly under glaze. Then you stop. You don't keep brushing. You let the red sit. You let it be itself. Now you set this tile aside. Not in a stack. Not yet. You place it on the drying shelf where air can reach it. And you take the next tile. The loop continues. Outline, fill, rinse, blot, repeat. Tile after tile. The day becomes a quiet machine. And it is in this long repetition that the listener can drift, because nothing suddenly changes. Nothing jumps forward. It is only steady work. You paint one tile, then another, then another. And each time you finish one, you feel a small click of completion, quiet satisfaction, not excitement. A completed thing, a small piece of order made real. You pause, stand, stretch your fingers. You roll your shoulders once. You return to the stool. You continue. In the afternoon, one of the older workers passes by your table, not to interrupt, not to criticize, just to check the day's progress. They glance at a row of drying tiles. They look at the palette bowls. They look at the red. Red is always checked. Because red is the color that can betray you if it's too thin, too thick, too gritty, too eager. The older worker gives a small nod. Nothing theatrical. A simple confirmation that today's batch looks stable. Then, in a few calm words, they mention what you already know. There are orders. Large orders. Work that is meant to travel beyond Iznik. Tiles meant for imperial buildings and important patrons, where the wall must look like one continuous design rather than separate hands. You understand what this means? It means the pattern repeats across dozens, sometimes hundreds of tiles. It means your line must match the line of the person painting the next tile. It means your blue must be the same depth. It means your red must sit with the same raised body. It means the border must align when set beside another border. This is the quiet pressure of the job. Not loud shouting, not fear. Just the knowledge that consistency is everything. Because in the imperial city, a tile is not admired alone. It is admired as part of a wall. As part of a surface that wraps a space. As part of an interior that people enter to feel order and beauty around them. And in this period, major commissions exist. Large mosque complexes designed by the empire's leading architect and associated patronage networks, including the Suleimani complex and the tile-rich Rustam Pasha Mosque. You do not travel to those sites. You do not see the final installation, but you feel the demand in your schedule. You feel it in the number of tiles on shelves. You feel it in the way the workshop talks about packing, delivery, breakage, and deadlines. So you do the simplest thing. You return to your loop, because consistency is made by repetition, and repetition is made by calm. You check your palette again. You test the blue. You test the outline. You adjust water by a drop. You wipe the brush handle. You paint another tile. And another. In this way, pressure never becomes panic. It becomes practice. It becomes care. It becomes the steady act of doing the same thing well, again and again, until it becomes your normal. Outside the workshop, the world moves in larger patterns. Treaties are made. Borders shift. Trade routes open and tighten. Illness comes and goes. Plague recurs in early modern cities and regions, and cycles people learn to live around, quietly, practically, without theatrical fear. But inside the workshop, you keep your day small. You keep it steady. You keep your attention on the line in front of you, because that is what you can control. And control, quiet, limited control, is comforting. Later in the afternoon, the workshop shifts slightly, not away from painting, just into a second rhythm, preparation for movement. Finished tiles cannot sit forever. A kiln schedule is coming. Then delivery. Then installation somewhere far away. So while you paint, someone else begins packing the fully dried pieces from an earlier batch. You can hear the small sounds, straw being pulled from a bundle, boards being lifted and set down, ropes sliding through fingers, soft tapping as tiles are aligned in stacks. Packing is careful. Tiles are not forgiving of careless corners. A tile that cracks is not a small mistake. It is wasted time, wasted material, wasted firing space, and a gap in a wall. So the packing routine is treated as seriously as painting. The person packing does not rush. They lay down straw. They place a tile. They add straw. They place another tile. They align edges. They build a flat stack between boards. They tie the boards so the stack cannot shift during travel. They label the stack in the workshop's own quiet way, by arrangement, by location, by memory. And when the stacks are ready, they are moved to a waiting area. The transport itself is not dramatic, not a caravan of trumpets, just practical movement along roads, carts, pack animals, hands lifting and setting down. There is always risk, potholes, rain, careless handling, sudden stops. So the workshop does what it can. It protects the edges. It avoids loose stacking. It uses straw, cloth, wood, simple materials that absorb shock. It stacks tiles in ways that distribute weight. And while others pack, you keep painting. Because the kiln must be fed. The commissions must be met. The day continues. You finish another tile. You lift it carefully. You carry it to the drying shelf. You place it where air can reach it. Then you return to the table. Another tile. Another outline. Another fill. Rinse. Blot. Repeat. And if you notice a motif that might need to match a neighboring tile later, you pause. You adjust the curve. You keep the leaf angle consistent. You keep the border thickness consistent. Because you understand the final truth of these tiles. They will sit beside others. And the wall will reveal any inconsistency that the workshop missed. So you keep your hand steady. You keep your mind quiet. You do what the job requires. As the light lowers, the workshop begins to soften. Not because the work stops suddenly, because the body and the day have limits. You finish the tile in front of you. You do not start a fresh one if you cannot complete a clean section. You stop at the right time. Stopping at the right time is a skill. You rinse your brush thoroughly. You change the water if it has become cloudy. You wipe the stone slab. You cover the pigment bowls so dust cannot settle. You set the red aside with extra care. Red is always treated like it deserves its own quiet corner. You clean the table. A slow wipe. Then another. Then a check with fingertips for grit. You cover tiles that need protection. You make sure nothing is left where a careless sleeve could smear it. You make sure the drying shelf is stable. You check that the kiln area is orderly, boards and saggers and shelves prepared for the next schedule. Then you stand. You stretch your fingers again. You roll your shoulders once. And you step out. Outside, evening air feels different. Cooler. Still slightly damp. The town has its own evening rhythm. People returning from markets. A child's voice somewhere. A door closing. A pot being set on a low fire. You walk home. Not with triumph. With a quiet tiredness that feels earned. At home there is food. Not grand. Just steady. Bread again. Perhaps a simple soup. Something with grains. Maybe vegetables, maybe a bit of dairy. Food that fills the belly without waking the mind. Ottoman food culture varies by place and class, but broad categories, grains, dairy, vegetables, fruits, and meats, remain common across many contexts. You eat slowly. You drink water. If there is tea in your household, it is not the tea culture of later centuries. Tonight, the drink is simply what is available and normal for your setting. Water, perhaps a thin soup, perhaps something mild. You sit with family. There is no need for deep conversation. A few quiet words, a shared glance, a child leaning against you heavy with sleep. And in this small domestic space, history becomes what it always becomes. Not the empire, not the treaties, not the architectural glory, just the daily reality of people trying to live steadily. If there are worries, they are quiet worries. A rumor of illness in another district. A mention of higher prices in the market. A word about a tax collector who will come soon. Not panic, just the ordinary awareness that life is not always smooth. Sometimes rain comes too heavy and turns paths into mud. Sometimes a season is harsher. Sometimes trade slows. Sometimes a distant conflict shifts the price of pigments. You do not need to name every cause. You only need to feel the gentle truth. The workshop is a stable place inside an unstable world. And that stability is precious. After eating, you wash your hands. Pigment dust clings around the nails. So you wash slowly. You dry your hands. You stretch your fingers once more as if thanking them. Then you lie down. The room is dim. The air is cool. And your mind, after a day of repetition, knows how to do one final repetition now. In and out. In and out. You can imagine the workshop as it rests overnight. Brushes clean and placed. Bowls covered. Tiles drying quietly. Boards stacked. The kiln waiting. The day paused, not ended. And you, no longer painting, simply resting. The next day arrives the way days usually arrive for working people. Not like a grand beginning. More like a continuation. The workshop door opens early. The air is cooler in the morning, and the kiln area holds the faint memory of old heat, like warm stone that never fully forgets. Today is not only painting. Today is kiln day. That doesn't mean a dramatic fire or loud excitement. It means careful handling. It means patience. It means quiet decisions about which tiles are ready and which must wait one more day. You step into the kiln space slowly. You don't bring dust. You don't bring wet cloth. You don't bring careless sleeves. A kiln area is an honest place. Any mistake becomes visible later. On shelves nearby, painted tiles rest. Some are ready. Some are still drying. You can tell by the feel of the air around them and by the way the surface looks. A tile that is still holding moisture feels slightly different, almost as if it is still breathing. You pick up one tile with both hands. You tilt it toward the light. You check the red first. Red is always checked first. Because it must be thick enough to hold body, but not so thick that it cracks or crawls. You check the outlines. You check the filled areas. Then you set it down and move to the next. This inspection is quiet, not judgmental, just practical. When enough tiles are ready, the kiln work begins. In many historical descriptions of fritware/stone paste production, pieces are protected in the kiln using covered containers known as saggars, which help prevent ash and flames from marking the surface. You don't say the word saggar like a scholar. You simply know the containers by touch. Earthenware protection, shaped for the kiln, used again and again, scarred with heat. You line the kiln furniture carefully. Tiles are stacked so they won't touch in ways that cause sticking or warping. Spacing matters. Airflow matters. The calm logic of heat matters. Technical summaries and studies commonly place Iznik firing temperatures roughly in the high 100 Celsius, often around 800 to 900 degrees Celsius for typical firings, enough to mature the body and glaze without the drama of extreme temperatures. You do not measure temperature with modern numbers. You measure it the old way, by routine, by experience, by the kiln master's eye, by the feel of timing and fuel and color inside the firebox. The kiln is lit, not like a sudden blaze, more like a gradual waking. Fuel is fed in. The heat rises slowly. The sound is steady, a low, constant presence like wind behind a wall. Now comes waiting. Waiting is work too, because waiting is when you protect the schedule. You don't leave and forget. You stay near. You listen. You adjust fuel as needed. You keep the firing steady. And as the hours pass, the workshop's mood becomes quieter in a particular way, not sleepy exactly, more like focused, because heat is serious. Not frightening, just serious. After the peak is reached, the kiln is allowed to cool. And cooling is not optional. Cooling is part of the craft. You cannot rush cooling without risking cracks. You cannot open the kiln too early without shocking the pieces. So you wait again. And this waiting is the kind that makes time feel thick, heavy, calm. A whole day can pass inside this patience. When the kiln has cooled enough, the moment arrives. Not a triumphant reveal. A careful opening. The kiln door is eased open. Warm air moves out. Not a blast, just a release. Inside, tiles sit in their places, now transformed. The glaze has matured. The surface has changed from matte pigment to a unified, glassy skin. The colors look different now, clearer, deeper, more alive. This is always a soft surprise even when you expect it, because you never see the final colors until after firing. Underglaze work is like that: paint now, trust later. You remove one tile. You set it on a padded surface. You look at it slowly, not hunting for flaws in a harsh way, simply reading what happened. Most tiles are good. Most days are steady. But in ceramics, variation is always possible. A tiny crack at the corner. A hairline you only see when light hits the surface at an angle. A place where a pigment spreads slightly more than expected. A small bubble in glaze. A faint pinhole. These aren't disasters. They are information. You hold the tile and tilt it again. You check the outlines for sharpness. You check the red for body. You check whether the glaze pooled oddly in a corner. If a tile has a small flaw but is still usable, it might be set aside for a less prominent location. If the flaw is too visible, it may be rejected. Not with anger, with acceptance, because a workshop cannot afford emotional reactions to physics. It can only afford routines that reduce loss. So your response is calm. You sort. Good stack. Acceptable stack. Reject stack. And then you learn. If outlines blurred, perhaps the pigment was too thin. If a color shifted, perhaps the firing ran slightly longer. If a tile cracked, perhaps it was too damp going in or cooled too fast. You don't need to blame anyone. You only need to refine. This is how craft improves, not by speeches, by small corrections. Once tiles are approved, they must travel, not as art objects, as building materials, as components in a larger architectural plan. This is a major part of what made Iznik production significant in the mid-16th century. Large quantities of tiles were produced for major imperial projects and circulated outward into monumental building programs. You don't say, circulated outward. You do the practical steps that make travel possible. Tiles are padded. Straw, cloth, boards, rope. Stacks are made flat and stable. Bundles are tied so they won't shift. Someone, maybe you, maybe a carrier, checks that labels match the workshop's records. Then the tiles leave. They move by cart where roads allow. By pack animal where roads are narrow or rough. They pass through hands that do not care about tulips or scroll work. Those hands care about weight, balance, and not breaking things. And because your tiles are destined for Istanbul, the final stop is not a single doorway. It's a chain, a receiving point, a clerk or foreman, a storage space near the building site. Then the installers, people who set tiles into place and align borders so patterns join cleanly. All the tiles that survive the kill's judgment begin a new phase of their existence. They become cargo, objects to be moved carefully from Iznik to wherever they are needed. This transportation is not simple or automatic. It requires planning, protection, and people whose entire job is moving fragile, valuable things across distances without breaking them. The packing begins immediately after the tiles cool completely. A man whose title is simply the packer oversees this work. He has been doing it for perhaps 20 years and has developed systems that minimize breakage. His methods are not written down, but they are precise. Every tile must be protected. Every stack must be balanced. Every crate must be secured. First, he examines each tile individually. He looks for any crack that might have appeared during firing but was too small to catch during the initial inspection. A hairline crack now will become a complete break during transport. Better to find it here than to have it arrive broken in Istanbul. Flawed tiles are set aside. The customer ordered 500 tiles. The workshop must deliver 500 perfect tiles. Any that fail along the way must be replaced at the workshop's expense, so the packer's careful eye saves money. Perfect tiles are then sorted by pattern. This commission happens to be for a mosque designed by the architect Sinan, specifically the Rustam Pasha Mosque, which was completed just 2 years ago in 1563 but is now receiving additional tile decoration in a secondary prayer hall. The tiles you painted are part of this expansion. They must match the existing tiles already installed, which means the blues must be the same depth, the reds must have the same raised quality, the patterns must align. The packer creates stacks of similar tiles. 10 tiles per stack, no more. 10 is the maximum that can be safely stacked without risking damage to the bottom tiles from the weight of those above. Between each tile, he places a layer of clean straw. Not hay, which can contain hard stems that might scratch. Not cloth, which is expensive and holds moisture. Straw. Dried wheat stalks cut and cleaned, soft enough to cushion but firm enough to maintain spacing. Each stack of 10 tiles becomes its own unit. The packer wraps the stack in more straw, creating a nest. Then he places the straw-wrapped stack into a wooden crate. The crates are made by a carpenter who specializes in transport containers, built with wood from pine trees, light enough to be manageable but strong enough to protect their contents. Each crate is sized to hold 5 stacks or 50 tiles, with straw padding on all sides creating a buffer zone between the tiles and the wooden walls. 50 tiles per crate. For a 500 tile order, that means 10 crates. The packer arranges them near the workshop door, each one labeled with a mark that indicates it is part of the Rustam Pasha Commission. Crate 1 of 10, 2 of 10, and so on. The labeling is important. If crates are mixed with another order during transport, the result is chaos at the destination. The crates are heavy. A crate holding 50 tiles weighs perhaps 40 pounds, maybe more when you include the wood and straw. Too heavy for one man to carry comfortably for any distance. This is where the cart drivers come in. The workshop has a relationship with a transport company, if such an informal arrangement can be called a company. 2 brothers who own 4 ox carts and employ several drivers. They move ceramics, textiles, and other goods that require careful handling. They know the route from İznik to Istanbul intimately. They know which stretches of road are smoothest. They know where the worst potholes are and how to avoid them. They know which river crossings are safe and which should be avoided after rain. The brothers come to the workshop and inspect the crates. They count them, checking against their manifest. 10 crates each marked. They calculate weight and volume, deciding that this load requires 2 carts. 5 crates per cart. The carts have reinforced beds designed to absorb shock. They are pulled by oxen rather than horses because oxen are steadier, less likely to spook and jolt the cargo. The loading is careful. Crates are positioned in the cart bed so weight is distributed evenly. Each crate is secured with rope, tied in patterns that prevent shifting but allow some give if the cart hits a bad bump. Too tight and the ropes might crush the crates. Too loose and the crates will slide. The drivers know exactly the right tension. Once loaded, the carts begin their journey. It is perhaps 40 miles from İznik to Istanbul, but the route is not direct. The road follows the terrain, curving around hills, descending into valleys, crossing streams. In good weather, the journey takes 2 days. 3 if they encounter problems. The first day, they cover perhaps 25 miles, stopping before dark at a caravanserai, a way station built specifically for travelers. The caravanserai provides shelter for both drivers and animals, and security for valuable cargo. The drivers pay a small fee for the night's accommodation and the oxen are given water and fodder. The carts remain in a protected courtyard where the drivers can watch them. On the second day, they complete the journey, arriving at Istanbul and navigating through increasingly crowded streets toward the delivery address. The city is vast, far larger than İznik, overwhelming in its scale and noise. The drivers know where they are going. They have made this delivery before. They stop outside a warehouse near the construction site, where representatives of the architect's office are waiting. The unloading is as careful as the loading. Each crate is lowered from the cart, carried inside, and stacked in a dry area away from the warehouse's door where rain might enter. The warehouse master counts the crates, checks them against his own manifest, and signs a receipt confirming delivery of 10 crates in good condition. But the journey is not over. The tiles are not yet in their final location. The warehouse is merely a staging area, a place where materials accumulate until they are needed. The actual installation happens on the architect's schedule, when the wall is ready to receive tiles, when the mortar is mixed, when the installers are available. The installers are specialists in their own right. Setting tiles is not the same as painting tiles. It requires different skills, different knowledge. The installers must understand mortar, the mixture of lime, sand, and water that bonds tiles to walls. Too much lime and the mortar is brittle. Too much sand and it is weak. Too much water and it drips. The proportions must be exact, and the installers learn these proportions through years of experience. The wall itself must be prepared. The surface must be level and slightly rough to give the mortar something to grip. If the wall is too smooth, the tiles will not adhere properly. If the wall is uneven, the tiles will sit at different depths, creating shadows and disrupting the pattern's flow. So the installers first create a level undercoat, a layer of plaster that establishes a uniform surface. Then they begin setting tiles. They work from a corner, establishing a reference line that will keep all subsequent tiles level. The first tile is the most critical. If it is crooked, every tile after it will be crooked. If it is too high or too low, the entire wall will be misaligned. So the installers take their time with that first tile, using levels and plumb lines to ensure perfection. Each tile is set by applying mortar to its back and pressing it firmly against the wall. The installer holds it in place for a moment, allowing the mortar to begin its grip, then moves to the next tile. The spacing between tiles must be consistent, usually about 1/16 of an inch, just enough to allow for slight variations in tile size without creating visible gaps or overlaps. As the installation progresses, the pattern begins to emerge. Individual tiles that looked separate in the warehouse now connect into continuous design. A flower on one tile joins scrollwork on the next. A border on one tile aligns with the border on the tile above it. The installers must constantly check that patterns are aligning correctly, that the tiles are level, that the spacing is even. The work is slow. A skilled installer might set perhaps 30 tiles in a day, working carefully, checking constantly. For a 500-tile wall, that means perhaps 3 weeks of installation work, assuming 2 installers working together. The mortar must cure between sections, adding more time to the project. When installation is complete, the wall is allowed to dry for several days. The mortar must cure fully before anyone touches the tiles. During this drying period, the architect or his representative inspects the work, looking for any tiles that are crooked, any joints that are too wide, any places where mortar has smeared onto the tile face and needs to be cleaned. If the inspection passes, if the wall meets the architect's standards, then and only then is the commission considered complete. Word is sent back to the workshop in Iznik. 500 tiles delivered, installed, and accepted. The payment can now be finalized. The payment structure is designed to protect both patron and workshop. When the commission was first agreed, the patron paid perhaps 75% of the total price up front. This advance covers the workshop's material costs and initial labor. It allows the master to buy pigments and pay workers without waiting months for revenue. The remaining 25% is held back until the work is complete and accepted. This holdback protects the patron against defects or failure. If tiles arrive broken, they must be replaced. If tiles are installed poorly, the workshop bears some of the cost of correction. Only when the final wall is perfect does the remaining payment release. When that final payment arrives, it is distributed according to the same proportions as the advance. The master takes his share. The painters receive their shares based on how many tiles each painted. The journeymen and apprentices receive their portions. Everyone benefits when a large commission is successfully completed. For you personally, the completion of this 500-tile commission means perhaps 30 aki in final payment, added to the perhaps 120 aki you earned during the weeks of actual painting. Total earnings, 150 aki for approximately 6 weeks of work. This is good. This is what makes large commissions desirable. The pay is better than daily piecework and the work is steadier. You think about this as you wipe down your table at the end of the day. The tiles you painted this morning are part of the system now. In a few weeks they will be packed. In a few months they will be installed. In a year or two, someone will pray in the prayer hall where your tiles create a beautiful wall. They will not know your name. They will not think about grinding pigments or careful brush strokes. They will simply experience beauty, and that experience will be partly your creation. This is enough. This is the bargain of craft. Your work becomes anonymous in becoming permanent. Your name fades while your tiles endure. And in the practical terms of survival, your work translates into wages that feed your family, shelter your household, and allow you to continue working tomorrow. Iznik tiles are famously abundant at the Rustam Pasha Mosque, completed around 1563, where tile surfaces cover much of the interior, evidence of both supply capacity and installation planning. And the Suleimani complex's inscription dates the foundation to 1550 and inauguration to 1557, an example of the kind of massive patronage project that shaped demand. You do not need to imagine the whole city. Tonight we keep it small. We keep it calm. So imagine only what is closest to your job. A bundle leaving the workshop. A bundle arriving intact. A foreman opening it. A tile lifted out and checked for match. A stack placed on a shelf. And somewhere later, a tile set into wet mortar, aligned carefully, pressed gently into place. A wall slowly becoming a garden of pattern. Your name not written anywhere, but your hand present. Now the day is ending again. Not like a story with a loud conclusion. More like the last glow of a kiln fading to ash. You return to your workshop. You wash your hands. Glazed dust and pigment cling to your fingertips. You scrub lightly. You rinse. You dry. And you do the most comforting thing a craftsperson can do at night. You leave the tools ready for tomorrow. Brushes cleaned and laid flat. Bowls covered. Stone slab wiped. Cloths folded. Tile stacked safely. The kiln area quiet. No fire now. Only the memory of warmth in the bricks. Outside the evening air cools. And the world, large and complicated, moves on without demanding your attention. There are wars in the distance sometimes, treaties sometimes, illness sometimes. But you do not carry all of that into bed. You carry only what is yours, the feel of a steady line, the rhythm of rinse and blot, the quiet patience of drying, the calm acceptance of cooling, the knowledge that your work fits into a larger world without needing to control it. You lie down, your shoulders drop, your jaw loosens, and you let the workshop fade in your mind like a lamp turned low. If you want, you can picture it one last time, a small Ottoman workshop in Iznik. A table, a row of finished tiles, a row of drying tiles, pigment bowls covered, brushes resting, board stacked, a kiln cooling, a bundle tied and ready for the road, and you finished for the day resting. In and out, in and out, nothing to do, nothing to fix, only the quiet rhythm of breath. In the morning, when the workshop is calm again, you notice something simple. You are never truly working alone. Even when you sit at your table with your brushes and bowls, the craft is a chain of people, each one doing a part that makes the whole possible. A younger apprentice, still learning, moves quietly in the background. He carries water. He brings clean cloth. He sweeps dust away from the edges of shelves. His work is not glamorous, but it is important. Because dust is the enemy of clean lines. A journeyman, what some Ottoman sources call a kalfa, an intermediate stage between apprentice and master, checks a tile stack and adjusts a board so it sits straight. He has more skill than the apprentice and he carries more responsibility. He might help prepare surfaces. He might assist with mixing. He might do less visible tasks that still require practiced hands. And then there is the master, the USTA, the person whose calm authority holds the workshop steady. The master rarely needs to raise his voice. He doesn't need to. His control is in planning, in standards, in deciding when a batch is acceptable and when it needs to be redone. In this era, Iznik production is closely connected to high demand and court-driven commissions, and many accounts emphasize that large-scale production was stimulated and shaped by elite architectural projects. You don't discuss court politics at your table, but you feel the consequences in the workshop's organization. Consistency matters. Speed matters, but not at the cost of quality. Record-keeping matters because orders have quantities, deadlines, and expectations. So your day becomes a calm participation in something larger. Not a speech, not a parade. Just your hand making stable lines, because stable lines are what the chain needs from you. You begin your work again. A tile placed down carefully, a cloth smooth, a brush chosen, and the workshop settles into the soft rhythm of purposeful activity. In the middle of the day, the most practical thoughts arrive. Not philosophy, not grand meaning, just quiet calculation. How much work can be done? How many tiles are needed? How much pigment is left? And how the household will be supported. In Ottoman cities and towns, money exists as coin, and daily wages can be recorded in registers, often expressed in aki, with pay varying by skill and occupation. Economic historians have used such records to estimate wages and purchasing power. You are a skilled worker. And while we won't invent an exact wage for an Iznik tile painter on this specific day, we can hold on to something calm and real. Studies of Ottoman real wages suggest that, in the 16th century, a laborer's daily wage could buy a substantial amount of staple food like bread, and skilled wages were often higher than unskilled wages. That doesn't mean life is easy. It means life is measured. Measured in loaves. Measured in grain. Measured in whether oil is affordable this week. Measured in whether meat is a rare treat or a regular purchase. When you think about payment, you don't imagine piles of coins. You imagine stability. A workshop that receives orders steadily. A workshop that is not punished by late payment. A workshop that can buy fuel for the kiln. Because without fuel, skill is useless. So you value reliability. And you understand why markets are watched closely. The Ottoman world is known for market regulation and inspection, practical attention to weights, measures, and everyday fairness, so that ordinary people can buy ordinary goods without constant chaos. You've seen the market inspector's presence, even if you don't speak to him. You've seen merchants straighten their posture when inspection is near. You've seen measures checked. You've seen people complain when prices rise. It's not drama. It's daily life. And in your own household, the shopping is simple: bread, vegetables when in season, cheese or yogurt when possible. Maybe a little dried fruit or onions or legumes for stew. Ottoman culinary histories commonly describe regular consumption of grains, dairy, vegetables, fruits, and meats, varying by place and class, but forming a stable base of nourishment. So when you're paid, you translate it immediately into calm outcomes. This pays for bread. This pays for oil. This pays for fuel. This keeps the household steady. And steadiness is the most comforting kind of wealth. When the day's work is done and you step outside, Iznik feels like what it is: a real town in a real landscape. Not a museum. Not a postcard. It sits near water. Near fertile ground. Near the practical resources that make ceramics possible. One reason Iznik became such an important ceramic center is simple and unromantic. It had access to suitable clay deposits and access to firewood for kilns, material advantages that support long-term production. So when you breathe in the evening air, you smell earth and water. You feel dampness in the cool. You sense the lake's presence nearby, even if you don't look at it directly. And you feel tired in the best way, the tiredness of hands that did what they were supposed to do. At home, your household is not theatrical. It is small routines. A pot on a low fire. A spoon stirring. A child asking a question and being answered softly. Cloth being folded. A bowl being rinsed. If the day's pay allows, the meal is slightly better. If it doesn't, the meal is still steady. Bread. A simple soup with legumes. A bit of cheese or yogurt. Olives. Vegetables. Nothing fancy, but enough. And in the corner of the room, the tools of daily life remain close. A needle. A small knife. A clay cup. A woven basket. The household, like the workshop, runs on quiet repetition. Washington dry. Fold. Sweep. Cook. Rinse. Sleep. And because your work is tied to building projects far away, you sometimes wonder, softly, where your tiles are right now. On a cart. In a storeroom. On a shelf near a construction site. Waiting for the installer's hand. Waiting to become part of a wall. This thought is calming. It makes your day feel connected to something larger, without forcing you to carry the weight of that larger thing. Even in a quiet workshop, the outside world is always there. Not as loud news, more like weather. Sometimes calm, sometimes unsettled, sometimes affecting your life in small ways you can't fully predict. In the mid-1500s, one important stabilizing marker on the eastern frontier was the Peace of Amasya, 1555, between the Ottomans and the Safavids, often described as a significant agreement that held for roughly 2 decades. You do not sit at a table negotiating borders, but stability matters to you, because stability can mean trade routes are less disrupted. It can mean pigments arrive more predictably. It can mean large commissions continue without sudden interruption. And commissions are the quiet heartbeat of your workshop. Then there is illness, not a single apocalypse, not a dramatic scene, but recurring waves that cities learn to live around. Scholars of the Ottoman Mediterranean discuss plague as a recurring reality in Ottoman lands across the early modern period, shaped by connectivity, trade, and urban life. In your day-to-day life, this becomes simple behaviors. You avoid unnecessary crowds when rumors rise. You wash your hands. You keep your household close. You don't panic. You adapt. And the workshop adapts too, keeping work steady, keeping routines clean, keeping schedules flexible. Because the world doesn't stop, but it does change pace. And then there are disasters that feel like nature itself shifting the rules. Wind, storm, flood. In Istanbul, far from Iznik, but connected through supply and demand, historical research notes episodes like a major flood in 1563, described in later chronicles, that damaged infrastructure and contributed to serious problems like water supply disruption. You don't watch that flood with your own eyes, but you feel the ripple effects. If a major city struggles, building schedules can change. If building schedules change, deliveries change. If deliveries change, pressure moves backward through the chain, quietly, until it reaches workshops like yours. Later in the 16th century, historians also described the empire facing a cluster of natural and political stresses, storms, shortages, and missteps, that contributed to broader instability in the late 1500s. Again, this is not a warning. This is not doom. This is simply the background truth of history. Even beautiful things are made in imperfect times. And perhaps that is part of why people love tiled interiors. Because the wall offers order when the world does not. So when you return to your table the next morning, you bring this truth with you in a quiet way. You cannot control everything, but you can control your line. You can control your pigment consistency. You can control your patience. You can control your rinse and blot routine. And there is comfort in that. Because the smallest control, steady, humble control, can be enough to get through a day. Morning in Iznik doesn't feel heroic. It feels practical. The air is cool, slightly damp, and the town is already awake in small ways. Doors opening, sandals on packed ground, a low murmur from somewhere you can't quite see. Before the workshop fully begins, you pass near the market. Not to wander, just to check what matters. The cost of ordinary life. A basket of greens. A handful of olives. A small lump of cheese. A jar of oil. In towns like yours, food is not a performance. It's a steady equation. If prices are calm, the household is calm. If prices rise, people become quieter. Not dramatic, just careful. You don't stop long. You don't argue over every coin. You simply look, remember, and move on. Because there's another cost you think about too, one people don't always see, the cost of color. Pigments are small, but they carry value. They arrive through trade, through routes and agreements in reliable hands. When supplies are smooth, the workshop breathes easily. When supplies tighten, when a caravan is late, when a route is muddy, when a merchant holds back stock, then the bowls on your table become smaller and planning becomes more delicate. You keep that thought in your pocket, not as worry, as awareness. Then you step into the workshop. Today, a small change waits for you. A folded note, or a message carried by someone from another workshop room. Nothing dramatic, just a request. The master speaks in numbers and calm expectations. A set of tiles must match one another closely, not only in pattern, in tone, in line weight, in how full the blue feels, in how the red sits. Because these tiles are meant to be seen together, on a wall, in a band, around an arch, inside a space meant to feel unified. You don't need a lecture to understand this. You've seen what happens when tiles don't match. A wall looks restless. A border looks uneven. The eye catches on tiny differences and cannot fully relax. So today you work with a special kind of attention, the kind that doesn't feel like stress, only like care. The master sets out a reference tile from an earlier approved batch. You place it beside your blank tile. You compare. Not obsessively, just enough. Then you prepare your pigments with the reference in mind. You mix the cobalt blue slightly more carefully than usual. Not by guesswork, by small tests, a stroke on a shard, a glance, another drop of water, another tiny grind. Your goal is not new. Your goal is same. This is the hidden labor behind visual harmony. And it's one of the reasons this job feels so quiet. You're not chasing novelty. You're supporting continuity. Then you set the reference tile aside, safe and clean, and you begin your work. Halfway through the morning, something small happens. You notice it because your hands know what normal feels like. The blue is slightly gritty. Not enough to ruin everything, just enough that the brush doesn't glide as smoothly. You don't sigh dramatically. You don't blame anyone. You simply solve it. You set the tile down. You cover it so dust won't settle. You return to your slab. You grind longer. Slow circles, steady pressure. Then you strain the mixture. Some workshops use a fine cloth for this when they need a smoother pigment. You rinse the bowl. You pour back the pigment. You test again. Now the stroke lays down more evenly. This is the difference between a novice and a practiced hand. The novice fights the material. The practiced hand listens. You return to the tile. You re-enter the pattern where you left off. You fill the leaf sections. You leave tiny breathing spaces so pigment doesn't flood an outline. You place turquoise in the right pockets of the design. You keep green tones calm, present, not loud. Then you pause before using red. Red is always a decision. Even in a quiet workshop, red is the color that can become too much if treated casually. So you place it as an accent, not a takeover. A small blossom center, a controlled flourish. Then you stop. You let it sit, and you move on. When you finish the tile, you don't stack it. You set it down on the drying shelf with room around it. Because the second quiet truth of ceramics is this: rushing drying creates trouble later. And trouble later is always more expensive than patience now. Now, softly, we move away from Iznik for a moment. Not for a grand tour. Just for a single calm scene, the handoff. Imagine a delivery arriving in the imperial city. Not with trumpets. With a cart. With boards tied tight. With straw packed carefully. The bundles are carried into a receiving space near a building site. A place that smells like wood, lime, and dust. A foreman is there. Practical, focused. He unties the rope. He lifts the board. He removes straw. And then he checks. He checks like a person who has seen breakage before. He checks edges first, then surface, then consistency. He sets tiles side by side and looks at how the blues sit together. He looks at whether the reds feel similar in body. He looks at line thickness. He doesn't need to praise. He only needs to confirm, this batch belongs together. Then he signals to the installers. And now the tiles meet the wall. An installer lifts a tile, sets it into place, adjusts it by a fingertip's width. He aligns the border. He checks that the motif continues cleanly into the next tile. He presses gently, not aggressively. He wants it to sit right. The next tile comes, then the next. The wall begins to become what the workshop intended, a continuous garden of pattern, a calm surface that hides the labor behind it. And somewhere, in that moment, your work becomes anonymous in the best way. Not forgotten, just absorbed into beauty. This is how most real craft lives in history. The craftsperson's name fades. The result stays. And the result is meant to make a space feel ordered and calm, even for people who never think about pigments or kills at all. After the workshop, the town feels softer. Not because life is easy, because the day's hardest focus is finished. You walk along small streets where people know each other by rhythm more than by formal introductions. A neighbor nods as they carry water. A child runs past with something wrapped in cloth, careful not to drop it. An older woman pauses to adjust a basket and says something ordinary, about the weather, about a price, about a cousin who visited. In a town shaped by craft, you notice craft everywhere. Hands that mend, hands that carve, hands that cook, hands that carry. And your own hands, still faintly stained by pigment, feel like part of a larger pattern of work. Near the water, the air changes. It holds a coolness that the streets don't have. It smells faintly of wet earth and plant growth. Even if you don't go all the way to the shore, you feel the lake's presence the way you feel a wall behind you, quietly without needing to look. You stop for a moment where the path is clear. You breathe. You let the day loosen. Then you continue home. Your house sits in a row of similar houses, all modest, all occupied by working families. The walls are thick plaster over brick, whitewashed once but now showing the gray stains of weather and time. The door is wood, worn smooth by years of hands pushing it open. You lift the latch and enter, and the smell of your home surrounds you immediately. It is different from the workshop smell. Here there is cooking, the ghost of today's meal and yesterday's and last week's all layered together. There is the faint wool smell of the sleeping mats. There is the particular scent of the people who live here, your wife and children, so familiar that you notice it only when returning after hours away. It is not unpleasant. It is simply home. Your wife is at the hearth tending a pot. Her name is Ice, and she is perhaps 5 years younger than you, though neither of you knows your exact age. Such records are not kept for people like you. She looks up when you enter, and her face shows the particular tiredness of someone who has also been working all day. Managing a household is not rest. It is fetching water from the communal well, carrying heavy jars balanced on her hip. It is kneading dough if there is flour to make dough. It is washing clothes in cold water, scrubbing out stains on stones. It is watching children, stopping them from running into fires or falling into wells or fighting with each other. It is endless small tasks that accumulate into exhaustion. But she smiles when she sees you, a small smile, not dramatic. You're home, she says, which is statement and greeting combined. I'm home, you confirm, and the simple exchange completes the transition from workplace to household. You wash your hands in the basin near the door, the water cool and slightly chalky from the well. You can feel the last traces of pigment washing away from under your fingernails, though some will never fully come out. The blue especially. It stains the skin and stays. Your son appears from behind the curtain that separates the sleeping area. He is 7 years old, tall for his age, and showing signs of the manual dexterity that might make him suitable for tile work when he is older. He has been watching you work on several occasions when the master allowed him to visit the workshop. His eyes follow your hands with the intense focus of someone trying to understand how something is done. Can I hold your brush? He asks, not for the first time. When you are older, you tell him, also not for the first time. When your hands are steady. They are steady, he protests, holding out his hands to demonstrate. They are small hands, still soft, unmarked by work. They tremble slightly as he holds them out, proving your point without you needing to say anything. Steadier, you say gently. In a few years, he is disappointed but accepts this. He has learned that some things require waiting, require growth, require time. This is one of the difficult lessons of childhood, that desire alone is not enough, that capability must be developed through years of patient effort. Your daughter emerges next, 4 years old, carrying something cupped in her hands with great care. Look, she says, opening her hands to show you. Small stones, arranged in her palm in a particular order. The stones are nothing special, just pebbles from the courtyard, but she has been arranging them all afternoon in patterns that please her. You look carefully at her arrangement. The stones are organized by size, smallest to largest, creating a gradient. This is pattern recognition, the same skill you use when you arrange pigment bowls or position tiles. She does not know this yet. She only knows that some arrangements feel right and some feel wrong, and she seeks the right ones. Beautiful, you tell her, and her face lights up. This is the best part of coming home, these small moments of connection with your children, these opportunities to see them learning, growing, becoming people. Ice calls everyone to the evening meal. You sit on cushions around the low table. The pot contains bulgur pilaf tonight, wheat cooked with water and butter and salt until it is soft and filling. With it, there are roasted eggplant slices, soft and smoky, dressed with a little oil. There is bread, yesterday's loaf torn into pieces. There is a small bowl of olives, their saltiness providing contrast to the bland pilaf. The meal is simple but prepared with care. Ice knows exactly how much salt the pilaf needs, exactly how long to roast the eggplant so it is soft but not mushy. These skills are as real as your painting skills, though they receive no wages, produce no lasting objects, leave no traces beyond the satisfaction of fed bodies. You eat slowly, chewing thoroughly, making the food last. Your son eats quickly, efficiently, focused on getting food into his stomach. Your daughter picks at her meal, easily distracted, needing occasional reminding to continue eating. Ice eats after everyone else has been served, her portion slightly smaller than yours because you are the one doing physical labor all day. After eating, your son asks about your work. He wants to know which tiles you painted today, what colors you used, whether the red behaved properly. You try to explain about mixing pigments, about the importance of correct water ratios, about how a tile looks dull before glazing and brilliant after firing. He listens with the partial attention of a child who is interested but also easily distracted. Can I come to the workshop tomorrow? He asks. Not tomorrow, you say. Tomorrow we are painting a complex pattern and I cannot have distractions. I won't distract, he promises earnestly, though both of you know this is not entirely true. Children are inherently distracting. Their presence changes the atmosphere, makes it harder to achieve the deep concentration that detailed painting requires. Perhaps next week, you say, leaving open the possibility without making a firm commitment. There is a knock at the door. Ice opens it to reveal one of your neighbors, the potter who forms the tile bodies that you later paint. His name is Hassan, and he is perhaps 10 years older than you, experienced, reliable, someone the workshop depends on. He has come to borrow a tool, a scraping blade that you have and he needs. But borrowing tools is also an excuse for brief socializing, for the exchange of news and observations that keep the neighborhood connected. Hassan mentions that he heard about illness in another quarter. Not close, not immediate danger, but enough to be aware of. The illness is probably plague, that recurring visitor that comes in cycles, sometimes mild, sometimes devastating. You cannot prevent it. You can only be aware and take practical precautions. Avoid crowds when possible. Keep the household clean. Do not share food or drink with strangers. Pray, if you are inclined to prayer, that the illness stays far away. This kind of news is exchanged quietly without panic. Panic helps nothing. Awareness helps survival. Hassan mentions it not to frighten but to inform, and you receive the information with the calm of someone who has heard such warnings before and knows they must be taken seriously but not obsessed over. Hassan also mentions that rain is expected. The clouds have been building all day and old men in the market are predicting a storm. Rain means the workshop will be damper, which means tiles will dry more slowly. It means pigments might behave slightly differently. It means planning the work schedule around moisture conditions. Rain is not disaster, but it is complication. You give Hassan the tool he came to borrow, and he promises to return it tomorrow. He leaves and the house is quiet again. Ice prepares the children for sleep. They resist, as children do, trying to stretch the evening into more time for play, but eventually they are settled behind the curtain, lying on their sleeping mats, their breathing gradually slowing into sleep. You sit with Ice in the quietness after the children sleep. This is your time together, brief, rarely involving much conversation, but important. She asks about your day and you tell her about the tiles, about the colors, about the small satisfaction of work done well. She tells you about her day, about the child who fell and scraped his knee but was fine, about the price of eggplant at the market, about the neighbor's new baby who cries loudly at night. These exchanges are not profound. They are the ordinary commerce of marriage, the sharing of days, the witnessing of each other's lives. But they matter. They create the web of connection that holds a household together through years of work and worry and occasional joy. You think briefly about the future. Your son will need training if he is to learn a craft. The workshop master has suggested that when the boy reaches 10 or 11 years, he could begin as an apprentice, sweeping floors and grinding practice pigments and learning the basics. This would give him a path, a future, the possibility of becoming a skilled craftsman like you. Your daughter is too young to think about such things yet, but eventually there will be decisions about her future too. Marriage, most likely, to someone from a similar working family. Her life will probably look much like her mother's. Household management, children, the endless practical tasks that keep families alive. You have no grand ambitions for your children. You do not imagine they will become court officials or wealthy merchants. You simply hope they will have decent lives, useful work, enough to eat, shelter from weather and danger. This is success for people like you: stability, sufficiency, the continuation of modest but secure existence. Sultan Suleiman is old now, perhaps 70 years or more. He cannot live much longer. When he dies, there will be a transition to his son Selim. Transitions can be dangerous times. Policies change. Priorities shift. Building projects might continue or might stop. Your livelihood depends on those distant decisions made by people you will never meet. But there is nothing you can do about such things. You can only do your work well, save what money can be saved, and hope that the empire remains stable enough to keep work flowing. This is the position of the common person everywhere, dependent on systems too large to influence, hoping those systems remain functional. Ice stands and begins the evening cleaning, putting away the meal remnants, wiping the table, preparing for tomorrow. You help her, moving with the shared rhythm of people who have performed these tasks together for years. The pot is cleaned. The table is wiped. The hearth is banked so it will hold heat through the night without burning through all the firewood. The house is ready for night. The children sleep. The work is done. Tomorrow will bring new tiles, new patterns, new small challenges and satisfactions. But tomorrow is not yet here. Tonight, there is only the quiet darkness, the warmth of home, and the earned tiredness of a body that has worked well. You lie down on your sleeping mat, Ice beside you, and feel your muscles begin to release the day's tension. Outside, the first drops of predicted rain begin to fall, making soft sounds on the roof. Inside, the house is dry and warm and safe. This is enough. This is everything that matters. And sleep comes easily to those who have worked hard and have a safe place to rest. At home, the day becomes simple again. Not the workshop's kind of simplicity, where every speck of dust matters. A different simplicity. A pot, a bowl, a cloth, a corner where a child has left something half-finished. Someone in the household is preparing food in the calm way people prepare food when it is not a celebration. There might be bread, a thin soup with grains or legumes, vegetables in season, a little cheese or yogurt when it's available, olives when they can be afforded. If the week has been good, there might be a little meat on a special day, but most days are quieter than that. You eat slowly, not because you're trying to be mindful, because a working body knows what slow eating feels like, a quiet return of energy. A child asks a small question, something practical, something curious. You answer softly, not a lesson, just a simple reply. Someone mentions the market. Someone mentions a merchant who arrived late. Someone mentions that wood is a little harder to find this week. Not panic, just the small adjustments of living. Then when the bowls are cleared, you wash your hands again. This time the washing is not about pigment. It's about resetting, about letting the day end. Even in a calm town, you sometimes feel the outside world the way you feel a distant thunderstorm. Not close enough to frighten you, close enough to change the air. Someone says there was talk of conflict far away. Someone says a tax request may come sooner than expected. Someone says a city had trouble after heavy rain. And sometimes, quietly, someone says a sickness has moved through another neighborhood. In your world, people don't always have the luxury of stopping everything. So they do what they can, they keep work steady. They avoid crowds when they can. They wash more. They keep children closer. They speak more softly in the evenings. They don't dramatize it. They adapt. And in the workshop, adaptation is already normal. If a pigment arrives late, you adjust the schedule. If fuel is scarce, you fire in fuller loads. If a delivery route is muddy, you pack tighter. This is one of the hidden strengths of craft life. It teaches you to accept what you cannot control and control what you can. You can't control treaties. You can't control storms. You can't control the timing of illness, but you can control a line. You can control your brush care. You can control whether your blue matches yesterday's blue. That kind of control is small. And small control, repeated daily, becomes stability. So your mind doesn't need to carry the empire. Your mind only needs to carry tomorrow's first tile. And even that, only gently. Before you fully let go of the day, your mind returns, briefly, to the workshop. Not with anxiety, with the quiet satisfaction of seeing things in order. You imagine the kiln area, not blazing, just present. You imagine a shelf of finished tiles that came out clean, glaze settled smooth, colors balanced, outlines crisp. You imagine the sorting, done without harshness. This stack for the main run, this stack for secondary placement. This piece set aside quietly because it cracked at the corner. No anger, only the calm logic of materials. You imagine the best tiles, your best lines, placed with the reference tile and approved. Then you imagine packing again, not as a repeat of earlier scenes, but as a closing image, boards aligned, straw placed carefully, rope pulled tight, a knot finished with practiced fingers, a bundle ready to travel. And that's enough. Because tonight isn't about finishing every logistical detail. Tonight is about letting the work fade. So now we let it fade. You lie down, your shoulders sink, your jaw loosens, your hands rest open, no longer gripping anything. And your breathing becomes the simplest craft you know. In and out, in and out. If thoughts appear, you don't need to push them away. You can let them pass like someone walking outside your door. They come, they go, and you stay. If it helps, picture one final calm image, a tiled wall in a quiet space. Cool blues, soft turquoise, small greens, careful outlines, and red accents placed with restraint. A wall that makes a room feel ordered. A wall that holds the day's work without demanding attention. And behind that wall, somewhere far away, a small workshop in Iznik. A table, covered bowls, clean brushes, tiles drying silently, a kiln cooling. The day paused until morning. And you, resting. No need to solve anything. No need to remember anything. Just sleep. You can sleep now. Good night.